My name is Margaret Ellison. I am 68 years old. Last Sunday, my son brought his wife and his attorney to my kitchen table and set a document in front of me. A power of attorney form. He called it a precaution. He said it was for my protection. He said at my age it was simply the responsible thing. I looked at the document. I looked at my son. I looked at his wife, who was studying the wallpaper behind my head the way she always does when she is pretending not to be interested in something she is very interested in. I set the document down. I told them I would need to think about it. My son nodded. His wife smiled. They left 40 minutes later, believing the conversation had gone well. What they did not know, what they had no way of knowing, was that 3 years before that Sunday, I had already signed every document that mattered. Not a power of attorney giving my son control over my affairs. The opposite, an irrevocable trust placing everything I owned under legal protection, with my granddaughter as sole beneficiary and an estate attorney named Carol Briggs as co-trustee. My son could not touch this house. He could not touch the savings account. He could not touch the rental property on Grover Street that I had owned for 22 years. He found that out 4 days later. The phone call was the angriest I had heard from him since he was 17. I made myself a cup of coffee and I let it ring. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 15 years to the morning I first understood what I was eventually going to need to protect myself from. I built this house in 1987, not with a contractor, not with someone else's money. My late husband Robert and I bought the lot on Elm Creek Road with savings we had accumulated over 11 years of working and not spending what we did not need to spend. We hired a small crew for the foundation and the framing. Robert did the finish work himself, the trim, the built-in shelving in the study, the kitchen cabinets he cut and sanded in the garage over 2 winters. I painted every room. I chose every color. I planted the garden along the south fence the spring we moved in, and I have tended it every year since. The house smells like old wood and something faintly sweet that I have always believed comes from the cedar closet in the upstairs hallway. In winter, it smells like the fireplace. In summer, the garden comes through the kitchen window in the mornings. Roses and something green and alive. The floors are original hardwood, uneven in the hallway where Robert replaced 3 boards after a leak in 1994. I know every sound this house makes. The 3rd step on the staircase, the kitchen door in the wind, the particular settling sound the northwest corner makes in January when the temperature drops below 20. Robert died in 2009. We had been married for 31 years. He left me the house, the savings, and a handwritten note I have kept in the cedar closet since the day I found it. It said, "You built more of this than I ever gave you credit for. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I did not fully understand why he felt the need to write that until some years later. My son Daniel was 34 when Robert died. He came to the funeral with his wife Cheryl and their 2 children, and he was, in those weeks, the son I had raised. Attentive, present. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He helped me sort through Robert's belongings with patience and care. That version of Daniel lasted approximately 8 months. By the following spring, he had begun what I can only describe as an audit of my life. How much was in the savings? What the house might be worth now? Whether I had thought about downsizing? Whether managing the rental property on Grover Street was too much for me at my age? My age, I was 61. His wife Cheryl drove by the rental property one afternoon that June. She mentioned it at dinner, casually, as if it had come up by accident, said it was a lovely building, said the neighborhood had really come up in value. I noted that she had driven by it. I said nothing, but I noted it. The recognition came on a Thursday afternoon 2 years after Robert died. Daniel and Cheryl had come for dinner. After the meal, Daniel helped me clear the table, something he rarely did. And while Cheryl was in the living room with the children, he said quietly, with the practiced ease of someone who has rehearsed a conversation, "Mom, Cheryl and I have been talking. You're here alone in a 4-bedroom house. The property taxes alone are significant. And with the rental income and the savings, you have more than you need right now. We thought it might make sense to talk to a financial advisor, together, about simplifying things. Simplifying. I dried a dish and set it in the cabinet, and I thought about that word. Together meant with him. Simplifying meant moving assets. Financial advisor meant someone he had already chosen. I said, "That's a thoughtful idea, Daniel. Let me think about it." He looked satisfied. He went back to the living room. I finished washing the dishes alone. That night I sat in Robert's chair in the study, the chair I had not moved since he died, the one that still held the shape of him somehow, and I thought clearly and without emotion about what I had seen accumulating over 2 years. The questions about the house value, the drive-by of the rental property, the mention of my age in conversations where age had no relevance, the way Cheryl looked at the built-in shelving Robert had made with his hands, not with appreciation, but with the measuring look of someone who is deciding whether to keep a thing or sell it. They were not malicious people in the obvious ways. They were people who had decided, quietly and with great confidence, that they already knew how my story would end. That I would eventually need managing, that my assets would eventually need consolidating, that it was simply a matter of getting ahead of it. They saw an older woman living alone in a house too large for her. They did not see what the older woman had built, or how long she had been building it. I called Carol Briggs the following Monday morning. Carol was an estate attorney whose office was 12 minutes from my house. A colleague had mentioned her name 3 years earlier at a dinner party, and I had written it on a card I kept in the kitchen junk drawer. I'd been thinking about calling her for some time. Daniel's dinner conversation moved thinking into doing. We met that Wednesday. She was in her early 60s, direct and unhurried, with reading glasses she took on and off throughout our conversation. She asked me to describe my assets, my family situation, and what I was concerned about. I described all three without embellishment. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "You're right to be here, and you're right to move now rather than later. Let me tell you what we can do." Have you ever watched someone treat what you built as if it already belongs to them? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Carol laid out the structure over 2 meetings. An irrevocable trust, she said. You transfer your assets into the trust now, while you are fully competent and in complete control. The house, the savings, the rental property, all of it moves into the trust. You remain the trustee for your lifetime. You continue to manage everything exactly as you do now. Nothing changes in your daily life. And after me, you designate a successor trustee and a beneficiary, someone you trust completely, not Daniel. I thought about my granddaughter, Lily, Daniel's daughter. 18 years old, quiet, serious, the kind of girl who noticed things and kept her own counsel. She had Robert's eyes and something of his steadiness. I designated Lily as sole beneficiary, Carol as co-trustee. The trust was signed and executed on a Tuesday morning in November. The deed to the house was re-recorded under the trust at the county recorder's office that same week. The savings account was retitled. The rental property deed was updated. From that morning, nothing I owned was in my personal name. Daniel could not access it. He could not transfer it. He could not manage it. He could not simplify it. Carol filed the trust documents and handed me a copy in a cream-colored folder. I took it home. I put it in the cedar closet next to Robert's note. Then I went on with my life. 2 years passed. Daniel continued his periodic conversations about my finances. I continued listening with interest and doing nothing. Cheryl continued appraising my belongings with her eyes. I continued noticing and saying nothing. Then Daniel brought an attorney to my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon and called it a precaution. I read the power of attorney form carefully. It was, in fact, a broad financial power of attorney that would have given Daniel significant control over my accounts and property. I set it down. I said I would need to think about it. They left satisfied. That evening, I called Carol. She picked up on the second ring. He brought a POA form, I said. I expected that, she said. Are you ready to move to the next step? I have been ready for 3 years, I said. She filed a formal notice the following morning, a public declaration of the trust's interest in all 3 properties, recorded at the county recorder's office. From that moment, any attempt to access, transfer, or encumber those assets would trigger an immediate legal conflict with the recorded trust. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because this is the part Daniel did not see coming. The next step was a letter. Carol sent formal written notice to Daniel informing him that the assets he had been discussing, the house on Elm Creek Road, the savings, the rental property on Grover Street, were held in an irrevocable trust and were not subject to any power of attorney or third-party management arrangement. He received the letter on a Thursday. He called me Thursday evening, then Friday morning, then Friday afternoon. I answered the third call. He was not shouting. Daniel was never a shouter, but his voice had a quality I recognized, the quality of someone who has been operating on an assumption for a long time and has just discovered the assumption was wrong. Mom, what is this letter? What have you done? I've protected what I built, I said, the way I should have done years ago. You didn't tell me. You went behind my back. I went to an attorney, I said, the same way you brought one to my kitchen table last Sunday without telling me what you were planning. I simply did it 3 years earlier. A silence. Then, why? Why would you do this? I thought about that question for a moment. Because I built this house, Daniel. Your father and I built it with our savings and our years in his hands. I watched you and Cheryl look at it for 2 years, the way people look at something they are deciding what to do with. And I decided I would be the one to decide. Another silence. Longer. Cheryl wanted to know if there was anything that could be done. Her attorney called Carol the following week. Carol's response was brief and factual. The trust had been properly established and recorded. The assets were protected. There was no legal avenue for challenge. Cheryl's attorney did not call again. Daniel and I still have Sunday dinners, less frequently than before. The conversation is different now, more careful on his side, more comfortable on mine. He has not mentioned simplifying my finances since the letter. Cheryl no longer looks at Robert's built-in shelving with that measuring expression. I think she understands now that it is not going anywhere. My granddaughter Lily is 21. She comes on Saturday mornings, and we have coffee in the kitchen, and sometimes we walk the garden along the south fence, and I show her what is growing and what needs tending. She asks good questions. She pays attention. She reminds me of myself at that age, before I knew what I know now. Robert used to say, the best thing you can do for the people you love is make sure they don't have to fight for what you meant to give them. I thought he meant keeping things organized, keeping the files in order, making things easy. He meant this. He meant legal structure. He meant trust documents and recorded deeds and the kind of protection that holds up not because people are good, but because the paperwork is correct. He would have been pleased with Carol Briggs. Daniel's financial advisor never got the meeting he was angling toward. Carol closed the final documentation last spring. As for me, I am still in this house, still in Robert's chair in the study in the evenings, still tending the garden along the south fence, still listening to the third step on the staircase and the kitchen door in the wind. I built this. With my years and my work and the savings I did not spend and the decisions I made carefully over a long time. No one is taking it. Not because I was lucky, not because they gave up. Because 3 years before they sat down at my kitchen table, I had already made sure they couldn't. If you have spent your life building something, a home, a savings, a piece of land, and you have watched someone in your family begin to treat it as if it already belongs to them, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe. There are more to come. More stories about women who built carefully, who planned ahead, who refused to be managed, simplified, or erased. I made myself a cup of coffee the morning Daniel called. I let the phone ring, and then I drank my coffee in peace. That is what preparation feels like. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because I think it is the part of this story that matters most. The week after Daniel received Carol's letter, I had a visitor I did not expect. Lily came on a Wednesday evening instead of her usual Saturday morning. She knocked and came in the way she always does. She has had a key since she turned 16, and she sat down at the kitchen table without taking off her coat. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Grandma, did something happen with Dad?" I poured 2 cups of coffee and I sat across from her. "Yes," I said. "Some things I should have told you about sooner. Let me explain." I told her everything. The trust, the documents, her name on the beneficiary line, what it meant and what it protected, and why I had made the decisions I had made. She listened the way she always listens, completely still, taking everything in. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've been carrying this for 3 years. I considered that." "Not carrying," I said. "Planning. There's a difference. Carrying is a weight. Planning is just work." She looked at me with Robert's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you were 18 when I started," I said, "and some things need to be ready before they're explained. I needed to make sure you were protected before I told you there was anything to protect." She nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Outside the kitchen window, the garden was going quiet for winter. The roses along the south fence had been cut back. The beds were mulched and waiting. I thought about my own grandmother, a woman I had barely known, who had died when I was very young, who had left behind nothing because no one had taught her how to protect what she built, who had worked her whole life and watched it dispersed by other people's decisions after she was gone. I thought about how long that pattern can run in a family if no one stops it. I stopped it. In a cedar closet upstairs, there is a cream-colored folder with Lily's name in the documents. There is a note from Robert that I have kept for 14 years. There is a key to this house that I will one day give to her directly, the way you give something that was always meant for a specific person. She will know what to do with it. I made sure of that. If you are a woman of a certain age, if you have built something with your years and your work and your careful decisions, and if you have begun to notice the way certain people in your life look at what you have built, I want you to hear this. You are not too old to protect yourself. You are not too late. You are not difficult or suspicious or unkind for wanting what you built to go where you intend. You are simply someone who has earned the right to decide. Call the attorney. Make the appointment. Do it this week, not next month. Your name on a piece of legal paper is the only promise that holds. A woman I once knew told me that. She was right about everything. Tell me your story in the comments. I want to hear from every woman who has been where I have been, who has watched and waited and planned and protected what was hers. I read every single one. And if this story gave you something today, subscribe. Come back next week. There are more stories where this one came from. We are not done yet.